The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as Navy SEAL Team 6 descended toward the remote village of Khost Province. Intelligence had reported Taliban fighters moving weapons through this area for weeks. What they didn't expect was the firefight that would change everything. Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez gripped his rifle tighter as the chopper touched down in a cloud of dust. The team moved quickly across the rocky terrain, their boots silent despite the rough ground. Years of training had taught them to move like shadows, even in broad daylight. The village appeared empty at first glance. Mud brick houses stood in crooked rows, their windows dark and lifeless. Goats wandered freely between the buildings, their bells the only sound breaking the mountain silence. But Rodriguez knew better than to trust the quiet. In Afghanistan, silence often meant danger. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison held up his fist, signaling the team to stop. Through his scope, he could see movement in the building ahead. 3 figures darted between doorways, carrying what looked like assault rifles, the Taliban fighters they'd been hunting. The first shots came without warning. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple windows as the enemy opened fire. The SEALs dove for cover behind a stone wall, rounds cracking over their heads like deadly fireworks. Rodriguez felt his heart pound as adrenaline flooded his system. "Contact front!" Morrison shouted into his radio. "Multiple shooters in the compound!" The firefight lasted 20 minutes. It felt like hours. The SEALs moved with practiced precision, leapfrogging from cover to cover as they advanced on the enemy position. Rodriguez watched his teammate Danny Kim take point, his movements fluid and calculated despite the bullets flying around them. Hospital corpsman Sarah Chen stayed close to the rear, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she followed the team's advance. At 26, she was one of the few female medics attached to SEAL operations. Her skills had saved more lives than she could count in her 3 tours of duty. The Taliban fighters put up fierce resistance, but they were outmatched. One by one, the enemy fire decreased until finally, silence returned to the village. Morrison signaled the all clear, and the team began their methodical sweep of the compound. That's when they found her. Chen was checking the last building when she heard the soft whimper. Following the sound, she discovered a young Afghan woman huddled in the corner of a back room. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, wearing traditional blue clothing now torn and stained with blood. The woman's left shoulder showed an obvious gunshot wound, fresh blood seeping through makeshift bandages. Her dark eyes were wide with terror as Chen approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "It's okay," Chen whispered, though she knew the woman probably didn't understand English. "I'm here to help." Chen called for the team while carefully examining the wound. The bullet had passed through the woman's shoulder, missing major arteries but causing significant tissue damage. She needed immediate medical attention. Rodriguez arrived first, followed by Kim and 2 other team members. They formed a protective circle while Chen worked, their weapons trained on the doorways. "Civilian casualty," Chen reported to Morrison over the radio. "Gunshot wound to the left shoulder. She needs evacuation." The woman flinched at every sound, her body trembling despite the warm Afghan afternoon. Chen noticed her hands were soft, not calloused like most village women who worked in the fields. Her fingernails were clean and well-maintained, small details that seemed out of place in this remote farming community. As Chen cleaned the wound, she noticed something else unusual. The woman had a small scar on her right wrist, barely visible but perfectly straight. It looked surgical, like the kind left by medical procedures Chen had seen in military hospitals. "What's your name?" Chen asked gently, using the few words of Dari she'd learned during her deployment. The woman's eyes darted nervously between the armed SEALs before settling on Chen's face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, shaking her head. Chen continued working, applying pressure bandages and preparing an IV line. The woman's vital signs were stable, but she was clearly in shock. More concerning was her behavior. Most Afghan civilians Chen had treated showed gratitude or at least acceptance of medical help. This woman seemed calculating, watching every movement with sharp intelligence. "She's ready for transport," Chen announced, securing the last bandage. "But something feels off about this." Morrison approached, his weathered face showing concern. After 15 years in special operations, he'd learned to trust his gut feelings. If Chen sensed something wrong, it was worth investigating. "What kind of off?" Morrison asked quietly. Chen glanced at the woman, who appeared to be resting with her eyes closed. "Her hands are too soft for a farmer. That scar on her wrist looks medical, and the way she's watching us when she thinks we're not looking." Rodriguez knelt beside them, his voice low. "The Taliban fighters knew we were coming. They were ready for us." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Intelligence leaks were every SEAL team's worst nightmare. In Afghanistan, information could mean the difference between life and death. Morrison made the decision quickly. "We take her with us for medical treatment, but she gets a full background check. Something about this whole situation stinks." As they prepared the woman for evacuation, Chen noticed her patient's breathing had become more controlled, less panicked. The change was subtle, but telling. Most trauma victims remained agitated for hours after being wounded. The helicopter extraction went smoothly. Chen monitored the woman's condition during the flight to the forward operating base, noting that her patient seemed unusually alert for someone who'd lost as much blood as the bandages indicated. At the base medical facility, Chen transferred care to the field hospital staff, but requested to observe the intake process. Something about this case nagged at her professional instincts. Dr. Williams, the lead surgeon, performed a thorough examination while Chen assisted. The bullet wound was clean, the kind that suggested either excellent luck or intentional placement to avoid vital structures. "This is interesting," Dr. Williams murmured, examining X-rays on his tablet. "The trajectory suggests she was shot from below and behind, not from the front where the fighting occurred." Chen felt her stomach tighten. The evidence was pointing towards something much more complex than a random civilian casualty. As they prepared the woman for surgery, Chen noticed her patient's eyes were open, watching the medical team with sharp focus. When their eyes met, the woman quickly looked away, but not before Chen caught something that made her blood run cold. Recognition. The woman had looked at Chen with the kind of knowing glance that came from prior knowledge, not the confused fear of a traumatized civilian. Chen stepped outside the operating room and immediately called Morrison. "Chief, we need to talk. I think our civilian might not be so civilian." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture Chen didn't like. A woman with medical scars in a remote village, Taliban fighters who knew they were coming. A gunshot wound that seemed almost carefully placed. As night fell over the forward operating base, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they'd walked into something much bigger than a routine patrol. The woman lying in their medical facility might hold answers to questions they hadn't even thought to ask yet. But first, they needed to find out who she really was. The next morning brought answers Chen wished she'd never discovered. Morrison gathered the team in the secure briefing room, his expression grim as Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Sarah Park spread photographs across the metal table. "Facial recognition came back overnight," Park announced, her voice tight with tension. "Our civilian casualty is Dr. Amira Hassan, formerly a cardiac surgeon at Kabul University Hospital." Chen felt the blood drain from her face. She'd suspected something was wrong, but nothing had prepared her for this revelation. "Formerly?" Rodriguez asked, leaning forward to study the photographs. Park nodded grimly. "She disappeared 18 months ago during a Taliban raid on the hospital. Intelligence assumed she was either killed or taken prisoner." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. What they didn't know was that she'd been working with Taliban medical units, treating their wounded fighters. The silence in the room was deafening. Every SEAL understood the implications. They'd rescued someone who might have been patching up the same insurgents who'd been trying to kill them. Morrison rubbed his temples, the stress lines around his eyes deepening. Any indication she was there voluntarily? That's where it gets complicated, Park continued, pulling up another file on her laptop. According to intercepted communications, Dr. Hassan wasn't just treating Taliban fighters. She was training their medics in advanced trauma surgery. Kim whistled low under his breath. She was making them better at keeping their people alive. Chen's mind raced back to her interaction with the wounded woman. The intelligent eyes, the calculated responses, the way she'd seemed to evaluate rather than simply react. It all made sense now. "There's more," Park said, her voice growing even more serious. "The weapons cache you hit yesterday? Intelligence indicates it was a setup. Someone leaked your patrol route to draw you into that compound." Rodriguez slammed his fist on the table. She was bait. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Dr. Hassan hadn't been caught in crossfire. She'd been deliberately positioned to be found by the SEALs, wounded just enough to require evacuation, but not enough to prevent her from accomplishing whatever mission she'd been given. Morrison stood and began pacing. "What's her condition now?" "Stable," Chen replied automatically. "The surgery went well. She'll make a full recovery." "Under guard?" Park nodded. 2 MPs outside her room, full security protocols. "But Chief, there's something else you need to know." The intelligence officer's expression grew even more troubled. "3 hours ago, we intercepted chatter about a planned attack on this base. The timing suggests someone on the inside provided specific intelligence about our defenses." Chen felt ice form in her stomach. "You think she's been gathering information while she's been here?" "It's possible. Medical patients often have more freedom of movement than standard detainees. She could have observed patrol schedules, security rotations, personnel assignments." Morrison stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Chen. "Doc, I need you to question her. You've built rapport, and as her treating medic, you have legitimate reasons to check on her condition." Chen's medical training warred with her loyalty to her team. Dr. Hassan was her patient, entitled to medical care regardless of her politics. But if she'd been using her medical treatment as cover to gather intelligence that could get American soldiers killed, that changed everything. "What exactly do you want me to find out?" Chen asked. "Whether she's been communicating with anyone outside this base," Morrison replied, "and whether she knows anything about the planned attack." An hour later, Chen walked into the medical ward, her stomach churning with conflicting emotions. Dr. Hassan was awake, sitting up in bed with her left arm in a sling. She looked younger without the dirt and blood, almost vulnerable. "How are you feeling?" Chen asked in English, watching for reactions. Hassan's eyes met hers directly. "Better, thank you," she replied in accented but clear English. Chen felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. Hassan spoke English well enough to have understood every conversation she'd overheard since her arrival. "Your English is excellent," Chen observed, pulling up a chair beside the bed. Hassan shrugged with her good shoulder. "I studied in London for 2 years during my medical residency." The admission was casual, almost conversational, but Chen recognized it as a calculated revelation. Hassan was establishing credibility, building trust through shared medical background. "I'm curious," Chen said, adopting a professional tone. "The gunshot wound you sustained has some unusual characteristics." For the first time, Hassan's composure flickered. "Unusual how?" "The trajectory suggests you were shot by someone behind and below you, not during the firefight we interrupted." Chen leaned forward slightly. "It's almost as if someone shot you deliberately, knowing we'd find you and provide medical treatment." Hassan's dark eyes studied Chen's face carefully. "You're very observant." "It's my job to notice details that might affect my patient's care," Chen replied. "Just like it was your job to notice details about this base while you've been here." The words hung between them like a challenge. Hassan's expression remained neutral, but Chen caught a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. "You think I'm a spy," Hassan said finally. "I think you're a very intelligent woman who found herself in an impossible situation," Chen replied honestly. "The question is whether you're going to let more people die because of it." Hassan looked toward the window, where afternoon light filtered through reinforced glass. "Do you know what it's like to watch children die because you don't have basic medical supplies?" The question caught Chen off guard. "No, I don't. The Taliban control the rural areas where most of Afghanistan's poor live. When their fighters are wounded, they take medical supplies intended for civilians. Children die of infections that could be prevented with antibiotics that went to treat bullet wounds instead." Chen felt the moral complexity of the situation settling around her like quicksand. "So you decided to help them directly?" "I decided to save lives," Hassan corrected. "Taliban fighter or village child, they're all human beings who deserve medical care. Even if helping Taliban fighters means they live to kill coalition soldiers?" Hassan's composure finally cracked. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I chose to be kidnapped from my hospital and forced to treat insurgents?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "They told me they'd execute the civilian patients in my ward if I didn't cooperate." Chen felt her certainty wavering. The woman sitting before her wasn't a cold-blooded terrorist. She was a doctor who'd been forced into an impossible choice between her medical oath and the lives of her patients. "But you're here now," Chen said gently. "You can help prevent more deaths." Hassan wiped her eyes with her good hand. "The attack is planned for tonight during the shift change. They know your guard rotations because I observed them during my medical evaluations." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're coming through the eastern perimeter where the fence line meets the fuel depot." Chen's training took over. "How many fighters?" 12, maybe 15. They plan to use the fuel depot explosion as a distraction while they assault the command center." Chen stood immediately. "I need to report this." Hassan grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "They'll kill me if they discover I told you." "They'll kill a lot more people if we don't stop them," Chen replied, but her voice was gentle. "You're a doctor, Amira. You took an oath to do no harm. This is your chance to honor that oath." Hassan released her grip and nodded slowly. "There's something else. They have inside help. Someone on your base who's been providing intelligence." Chen's blood turned cold. "Who?" "I don't know their identity, but I overheard radio communications. They'll signal the attack by cutting power to the eastern sector at exactly 2300 hours. Chen checked her watch. It was 1800 hours. They had 5 hours to prepare. As she headed for the door, Hassan called after her. "Corpsman Chen?" Chen turned back. "Thank you for treating me with dignity, even after you discovered who I am." Chen paused at the threshold. "You're still my patient, doctor. That doesn't change based on politics." Racing toward the command center, Chen's mind was already working through the tactical implications of Hassan's intelligence. If there really was someone on the base providing information to the Taliban, tonight's attack would test everything the SEAL team had trained for. But more than that, it would test whether a doctor's oath to save lives could overcome the hatred and distrust that had torn Afghanistan apart for decades. Chen burst into the briefing room where Morrison and his team were planning the next day's patrol. "Chief, we have a problem. The attack is happening tonight." The base transformed into a hive of controlled activity as word of the impending attack spread through secure channels. Morrison's team worked with base security to set up defensive positions, while Chen found herself in the unexpected role of intelligence coordinator, relaying Hassan's information to the command staff. Colonel Bradley, the base commander, studied the tactical map with growing concern. If they hit the fuel depot first, the explosion will disable half our communications equipment. That's the point, Morrison replied grimly. They want us blind and confused while they assault the command center. Rodriguez traced the eastern perimeter on the map. We can reposition our quick reaction force here, but we need to know exactly where they're coming through the fence. Chen spoke up from her position at the communications console. Dr. Hassan said they've been watching our patrol patterns for 3 days. They know where the blind spots are. At 2200 hours, every available soldier on the base was in position. The eastern perimeter bristled with hidden defenders, night vision scopes scanning the darkness beyond the fence line. Chen had volunteered to stay with the tactical command post, monitoring radio traffic and coordinating medical response if needed. The waiting was the hardest part. Every shadow beyond the perimeter could be an enemy fighter. Every sound might be the beginning of the attack that would determine whether Hassan's intelligence was accurate or whether they'd all been played by a master manipulator. At 2247 hours, the eastern sector lights went out. "There's our signal," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, weapons hot, they're coming." Chen felt her heart hammering as she watched the tactical display. Red dots representing friendly forces surrounded the expected infiltration point like a spider web waiting for flies. The first explosion came at 2251 hours, but not from the fuel depot. Instead, a blast rocked the northern guard tower, sending flames shooting into the night sky. Shouts erupted from the radio as soldiers scrambled to respond to the unexpected attack vector. "They're not coming through the east," someone shouted over the communications net. "Northern perimeter is under assault." Chen felt confusion and dread wash over her simultaneously. Had Hassan lied about the attack plan? Was this all an elaborate deception to draw defenders away from the real target? But then, Morrison's voice cut through the chaos with cold clarity. "Negative. This is the diversion. Maintain eastern positions. Our source warned us about this." Through the night vision monitors, Chen watched dark figures moving through the shadows toward the eastern fence. Hassan had been right. The northern attack was designed to pull defenders away from the real assault. The Taliban fighters moved with professional skill, cutting through the fence with practiced efficiency. But as they advanced toward the fuel depot, they walked directly into Morrison's carefully prepared ambush. The firefight lasted 8 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 11 Taliban fighters were dead or captured, and the fuel depot remained intact. More importantly, the base's communications and command structure had survived the night uncompromised. But as Chen monitored the radio traffic, she caught something that made her blood freeze. During the confusion of the northern diversion, someone had tried to access the classified communications equipment in the command bunker. "Colonel Bradley," Chen called out, her voice tight with urgency. "We may have found our inside source." The investigation moved quickly. Security footage showed Sergeant Mike Torres, a communications specialist with 18 months on the base, attempting to download classified patrol schedules during the attack. When confronted, Torres broke down and confessed to selling information to Taliban operatives in exchange for money to pay his gambling debts. As dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, Chen found herself back in Hassan's room, this time as a visitor rather than an interrogator. The doctor was sitting up, looking out the window at the sunrise. "Your information saved lives," Chen said simply. Hassan turned to face her, exhaustion evident in her dark eyes. "I heard the attack failed. Completely. 11 Taliban fighters captured or killed, no American casualties." Hassan nodded slowly. "Good." Chen pulled up the chair she'd sat in the day before. "What happens to you now?" "That depends on your command structure," Hassan replied. I suspect I'll be transferred to a detention facility for interrogation and eventual repatriation. Chen had been thinking about this question all night. What if there was another option? Hassan raised an eyebrow. The forward medical unit here is desperately short of surgeons. We treat Afghan civilians as well as coalition forces. Dr. Williams says we could use someone with your skills. Hassan stared at her for a long moment. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to practice medicine without choosing sides, Chen clarified. American soldier or Taliban fighter or Afghan civilian, in our medical unit, they're all just patients who need help. Hassan's eyes filled with tears. Why would you trust me after everything I've done? Chen considered the question carefully. Because last night, when it mattered most, you chose to save lives rather than take them. Because you're a doctor who was forced into an impossible situation and did the best you could. And because Afghanistan needs doctors who remember that healing isn't political. Hassan wiped her eyes and looked out the window again. In the distance, she could see Afghan children playing in a village that had been spared another night of violence. There would be conditions, Chen continued. You'd work under supervision initially. All your communications would be monitored. You'd essentially be rebuilding your life from scratch. But I'd be treating patients again. Yes. Hassan was quiet for several minutes, weighing options that probably all seemed impossible a week ago. Finally, she turned back to Chen. I accept. 6 months later, Dr. Amira Hassan had become an integral part of the forward medical team. Under Chen's mentorship, she treated everyone from wounded coalition soldiers to Taliban fighters to local children who stepped on unexploded ordnance. The partnership wasn't without challenges. Some soldiers remained suspicious of Hassan's background, and Taliban sympathizers in the local population viewed her as a traitor. But her surgical skills were undeniable, and her knowledge of local medical practices proved invaluable. Chen often watched Hassan work and marveled at how healing could transcend the political divisions that made Afghanistan such a dangerous place. In the operating room, Hassan treated a wounded American Marine with the same dedication she'd once shown Taliban fighters. Morrison's SEAL team rotated back to the United States after their deployment ended, but Chen chose to extend her tour to continue working with the medical unit. She'd found something in Afghanistan that she hadn't expected, a purpose that went beyond military objectives. On quiet evenings, when the medical ward was calm, Chen and Hassan would sit outside and watch the sunset over the mountains. They rarely talked about the night that had brought them together, but both understood that their partnership represented something larger than their individual stories. In a country torn apart by decades of war, two women from opposite sides had discovered that the oath to heal transcended the urge to harm. It wasn't much in the context of Afghanistan's larger conflicts, but it was a beginning. Hassan had stopped being wordless, finding her voice as a healer rather than a victim. Chen had learned that sometimes the most important victories weren't measured in enemy casualties or territory secured, but in the simple act of choosing compassion over vengeance. The wounded had been healed, not just physically, but emotionally. And in a small forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, two women proved that healing was stronger than hatred, that medical oaths mattered more than military objectives, and that sometimes the most important truths were found not in intelligence briefings, but in the quiet moments between doctor and patient. Years later, when both women had returned to their respective countries, they would remember that night not for the attack that was prevented, but for the trust that was built. Hassan would go on to establish a medical school in Kabul that trained doctors to treat all patients regardless of their politics. Chen would become a trauma surgeon herself, carrying lessons learned in Afghanistan into emergency rooms across America. But they would both remember the moment when a wounded doctor stopped being wordless and chose to speak the truth that saved lives. In the end, that choice had made all the difference.